One, I want to welcome Greg Kading to this conversation. Today, the purpose of having him on is to speak about some of the hot topics of today. There's a lot going on in the United States, there's a lot going on in the world, but more specifically uh, with some movements going on, defunding the police, there's rioting, there's vandalism, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of things going on today, and I wanted to personally bring Greg Kading on today to speak because I feel that he's a very intelligent human being who has a lot of experience in this category. I feel like he probably has some good perspectives to offer, and so I just wanted to thank you again, Greg, for taking this time to chat with me today.
Absolutely, Trey. My pleasure. I appreciate you having me on. And dialogue is more important right now than ever. So, even if we have opinions that might differ, the fact that we're willing to sit down and talk is monumental because it just seems like less and less of that is happening.
Totally agree. And just for the viewers, just for my friends, and anyone who may not even know either one of us, would you mind giving a little bit of background on your experience? What have you been involved in and things like that?
Well, professionally, I am a retired detective from the LAPD. I spent 25 years in law enforcement. I had a very kind of varied law enforcement experience. I worked gangs and narcotics and homicide. I'm a white guy that worked mostly in minority areas of South Central Los Angeles. And I got an opportunity kind of late in my career to work a rather well-known case, the case of Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, in his cold case murder investigation, which kind of carried over into Tupac's murder investigation. And then after I retired in 2010, I wrote a book called Murder Rap, and my book Murder Rap was then made into a documentary, and then that documentary led to a limited series on Netflix called Unsolved. Personally speaking, I grew up as one of three children to a single mom, and kind of stayed out of trouble just by the skin of my teeth long enough to be able to get a job in law enforcement when I was 20. And I currently am married. I have a wife of 30 years, and then I have a 30-year-old son.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And just moving into more of the ground floor of the conversation. Just most people are aware, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there was an incident. Of course, everyone knows George Floyd was killed. It was on display. It was on the media. Has since led to protests, violence, vandalism, but more specifically, something that's caught my eye, something I want to talk about, I think there should be dialogue on, like you're saying, is this whole movement to remove funds for the police and defunding the police. And I've seen, all these opinions on the topic. And as a former, detective, as someone who's been in that field, who has experience, I just wanted to get your take on it. What is your take on all these things happening today, defund the police and everything?
Okay, well, specifically in regard to that topic, we need to come to first an understanding of what we mean by defund the police. Do we mean just remove some of the funds, do decrease their budget and then use those funds for community programs so that the police are operating on a lesser budget, a more limited budget? Or does defund the police mean abolish the police? Because, that's a movement also.
Right.
So for us to have that conversation, I guess we would have to address both of those issues. Defunding the police and abolishing the police, in my opinion, is not in the best interests of the communities that they serve. I just don't think people have really thought that through. I think right now people are very emotional. They're really pissed off at their perception of law enforcement, their perception of a system that they perceive, at least within the African-American community, as systemic of racism. So all of these things have to be discussed, but they really do need to be thought through and not decisions being made on emotional reactions. because we all know we make emotional reactions, and more often than not, we regret them.
Sure, sure. And that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm not sure if people are thinking this through. Uh, I'm seeing the emotional reactions, and so I kind of agree with you. I thought it through, and I just want to know what people thought was on the other side of that, of defunding the police. And so, for the individuals that want to, abolish the police, do you have any messages for them?
Yeah, I think that it's, try to imagine a situation where you need help, desperately need help, and there's no one there. When there's somebody, outside your house prowling around at night, or your mom's house, and the cameras catch them, and they're sneaking around looking at windows, and there's nobody that's available to get there to figure out what kind of danger she might be in. Imagine that, because that's what you're getting. That's what you will get. There's no one going to respond. There's no one there to help. And maybe somebody else goes over there to help. Maybe you go over there to help. And now you get yourself into a situation where you don't know, you don't have the training, you don't have the proper understanding. And now you, in the process of trying to protect somebody else, get yourself into all kinds of trouble. So you really have to think these things through and imagine in a realistic way what it would look like if you got what you were wishing for.
Very well said. I totally agree. And I'm sure you're up on the latest news, maybe not. The Trump administration said that they have an executive order on police reform. Have you reviewed that? Do you have a view on that? Do you think that's good, positive?
Listen, there's always room for police reform. There's never a time where police have reached a level of professionalism to where there's nowhere else to go. There's always a better way of doing things, but it's a human institution, and you're dealing with very human situations. And of course, there's always, better training available. But I can tell you this, and most, I don't know the age of your average viewer, but I can tell you what, the cops in the 70s were better trained, better cops than the cops in the 60s. The cops in the 80s were better than they were in the 70s. The cops in the 90s are better than they were in the 80s. And that generational improvement has always been consistently going. I can tell you, and with no hesitation, the cops that are on the streets now are the best cops that America has ever had. Because we are continually trying to improve ourselves. We want to improve ourselves. We don't want to make our jobs harder. We don't want to bring drama and stress into our own personal lives, which is what happens when you get caught in misconduct. And if you think police departments want or encourage or cover up for misconduct, you're sadly mistaken, because guess what? That costs a lot of money. The lawsuits against departments and all of those things that end up costing hundreds of millions of dollars across our country every year, those aren't in the department's best interests. They want to mitigate that and minimize that whenever possible. So they recognize that we've got to get better training. We need to have better cultural diversity training. We need to have more empathy to situations. We need to have better mental health perspectives, all of these things. But it's still a system that has room for improvement.
Well, very well said. And do you feel like when stories like this, because this isn't the first time, obviously, we've seen anything like this, but do you feel like people are looking at it too black and white, as in all cops are bad? Do you think that they see one injustice and they judge everyone? Do you think that that's going on? Does that need to change? Obviously, it does, but
yeah, I mean, violence always looks bad. But violence is unavoidable in this particular profession. There is no way in which we can satisfy the demands of the community and then also remove the potential for violence. We're dealing often with violent individuals. We're dealing with lawlessness and lawfulness. Those who are given the responsibility of enforcing the law, and then those who are violating the law. And there's a collision course there that takes place. It's unavoidable. And it's inevitable that when there is violence on one side, the other side must also use violence to overcome that. And so, there's, in a utopian world, there's no violence, there's no criminal activity, there's no need for police. But we don't live in that world. Right. We live in a world where there is violence, and sometimes you have to overcome that with more violence.
Well said. Great perspective. And so I wanted to get your thoughts moving forward. I think you mentioned, I think you noticed that I think people are buying up guns a lot of places. What I'm saying is, where do you see this going? This is election season. Do you think that, do you think that things are going to level out and get better? I mean, of course we can hope for that, but right. What do you see? What do you foresee?
Yeah, if I'm being completely honest with you, Trey, I'm kind of losing hope, man. I'm discouraged. I'm typically an optimist, and I try to think of things in a very circumspect way. Right. But what I feel like is happening is that each side is being driven further and further apart, and that that middle ground of reason is eroding away. It's being lost.
Yeah.
And as we get further away from each other, there's going to be less willingness to cross that ground again, to come to the middle. And so that scares me. It's frightening. I'm seeing a whole division in my own family. Right. I'm seeing friends that are alienating one another, and this is unprecedented in my lifetime. I've lived through some issues.
Sure.
Lived through the Rodney King situation, and the results of that incident. But man, I've never seen anything like this, and it's I don't know. I don't want to give up hope, sure, but I'm also feeling very practical about what I'm seeing. And
it's fair.
We are in desperate need of leadership, local, regional, government. I mean, we just are. We don't have anybody out there that's a voice of reason anymore.
Totally agree. I feel like that's what we lack in society as a whole today, is that. And I appreciate you being honest about that. I feel that that's going to be, it's effective. And I totally agree. This is an interesting time period. I'm getting messages from people that, saying things that I never thought would say. Also, I'm seeing how I'm seeing the power of the media right directly into the street. As I walk past, another individual, I can see the fear. I can feel the fear. And it's just interesting to me these times, that we live in. So, really just wanted to get your perspective. Any words of encouragement, any words of advice for people before I let you go? Anything you want to say?
I would say just don't settle for, or don't. Let me try to articulate this, because what I'm trying to say, I'm not even sure I know what I'm saying. We have to start with individual accountability. We can't blame anybody for our lives. We have to take absolute responsibility for us in our households, us in our neighborhoods, us in our communities. And even though we need leadership, and even though it's more comfortable to blame, if we don't manage, and this is crosses all barriers. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't start with individual responsibility and accountability, then you really can't expect that for yourself.
Bottom line, I totally agree. Starts, as cliche as it sounds, it starts from within. So I totally agree, Greg. I totally agree, and appreciate everything that you've shared today. I knew this was going to be a quick conversation, more straight to the point. but yeah, I just want to share this with people and let them see it from your perspective, your view. So
I can just tell you this. I don't know what the demographics of your particular listenership is,
yeah,
but I can tell you this, is that, you know, we have to quit judging things off of limited information. We really need to learn how to have the patience, no matter how uncomfortable it is. We need to have the ability and the willingness to sit and wait, think things through, gather information, and formulate an informed opinion before we have a reaction. We really have to do that, because I can tell you this, it's this idea that there's systemic racism in police departments. It's not that so much. It's what it really is. It's a contempt of cop issue. You know, a cop is going to treat you that way. It's not about skin color. What it is based on is your behavior, your lack of respect, your unwillingness to go along with the program, your inability to listen and comply. And they are given that responsibility in our society. And if we don't understand and respect that, there's going to be conflict. But it's not necessarily race-based. What it is just, if you don't do what you're being asked to be told, this is how they're going to respond. And if it happens to be a white officer and a black subject, it's going to be perceived as racist. But really, it's something else.
yeah,
What it is it's that we have to figure out how to respect we can't have a society without law enforcement. You just can't.
right. Mm-hmm.
And that guy might be a total prick. That fucking cop could be a total asshole. But it's in your best interest to just recognize that he has the authority in the moment.
Right.
It really is. It's in your best interest. Just give him that authority in the moment. He's going to continue to be an asshole, whatever. That won't change if he is in fact one. But for you, don't make it worse.
Right. Totally. I totally agree. You know, my personal experience with any law enforcement, just to say it now, is is that it came down to how I conduct myself, how I present myself, how I speak. And so I've never had an issue personally. You know, that's just my personal, testimony on that is,
Yeah.
But I've seen other situations. And so I totally agree with what you said there. It comes down to, and the whole gathering information and coming from more of a grounded place before we let the emotion get caught up in the emotion, which is what's happening to a lot of people.
Right.
So yeah, I appreciate your time again.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you. It's really nice to meet you. I'm glad that we've built a bridge between one another, because if we all take the time to do that, maybe then maybe we can get over all the troubled water.
Absolutely. I got a lot of respect for everything you do. Keep hope alive, and I hope to maybe talk to you in the future again.
Absolutely, Trey. All right, brother.
Enjoy your evening.
All right. Yeah.